Morning, everybody. Good morning, comrades. It is Thursday, the 13th of May, 2021. I got the date right. How about that? Off to a good start today. How we doing? How's it going? How are we today? I wanted to kind of get a little bit more on the whole, I guess, it sucks to have to keep doing this day after day, and, but things are getting a little bit more escalated in Gaza. We're going to talk about that today. I finally found a pretty good video, hopefully, to talk about Keir Starmer and how he's going in the tank. The British Labour Party is calling the hell in a handbasket. That's good. And a lot more. So how are we doing? I know we got G Wolf, we got Ginny in the chat. Going to be on your smartphone for the first 15 minutes, so no smart-ass comments for you. Oh, geez. I'm doing good, Ginny. How about you? I got kids coming. Good for you. Proud of you. So that's good. That's good. I'm just hanging out here. I've just had like a hell of a, I don't know why. I feel like I've been like walking through a daze this week. I feel like I've been asleep like literally since last Wednesday or something like that. I don't know. It just, something about it, something in the air, something just got me like moving in slow motion, I suppose. So that's how things are for me. How about y'all? Got my covfefe here. No cats yet. They were taking their time out from being in here. You were in a bar fight and lost. What happened? What happened to you? That's not good. All right, let's get into it. Let's do some goddamn news, I guess. I guess we got to do some goddamn news. This is what we do around here, isn't it? At least that's what we say we do. Let's start with, yesterday, or was it yesterday? I think it was yesterday in Palestine. There have been more attacks on Eid, which is one of the holiest nights during Ramadan for the Muslim faith. So that's bad. And there's claims by Israeli officials that they have killed high-ranking military officials in Palestine. So that's bad. I do want to comment really quickly. Well, I'll get on this at the end, but let's check out this video. Jesus
In
Christ.
3 separate strikes, Israel again showed what it can do at will to Gaza's skyline. The Al-Sharouk Tower contained shops, offices and homes,
yesterday,
and on its top floor, the Hamas affiliate.
Yesterday, the number was 14 kids. Now it's 69 people killed in this next round of airstrikes. So it's getting really, really brutal in terms of Palestinians killed.
Al-Aqsa TV. Occupants had been told by Israel to leave. Seconds after the attack began, the building's silhouette replaced by smoke and dust.
Just absolute horror. Oh my God.
Across Gaza, a cloud of grief is spreading, taking hold of families, infecting a new generation. As the deaths mount, so does the feeling that this is just the beginning.
My daughter-in-law and my grandson died, and my granddaughter is missing without any trace. The Jews target women and children. My son's wife was 5 months pregnant. This is terrorism.
Less than an hour after the Al-Sharouk building was brought down, another rocket barrage began. Again, Israel's Iron Dome interceptors trying to deal with a huge number of targets. Hamas said it fired 130 rockets. Several got through to the town of Sderot, a 6-year-old boy killed in one direct hit on a building. others exploding in the coastal town of Ashkelon. Earlier, Israel killed 6 senior Hamas commanders close to the head of the military wing and involved in intelligence and rocket production.
I mean, but you see what the difference is, right? You have like little tiny rockets that can put a hole in a building and kill like 1 or 2 people at a time, which is, I'm not saying that's good necessarily, but then you have these like targeted airstrikes in response that are destroying entire buildings and neighborhoods in Palestine. And this is, by the way, in response to, let's not forget, Israeli settlers pushing out into Palestinian, Palestinian land that are essentially being colonized and like literally homes taken from people out there. It's like, I'm not saying that the rockets are going to work or anything like that, or even that it's a good idea, but the idea that like the response that Israel is hitting back with, or not even necessarily hitting back with, because I mean, again, it's back and forth. It's not back and forth, but like it's starting with the occupation, and then the response is rockets, and then the response to that response is just overwhelming military force, like on civilians again.
A short while ago, we eliminated top commanders of the Hamas General Staff, including the Gaza City Brigade commander and other commanders. And this is just the beginning. We'll hit them like they've never dreamed possible.
Like, he's even talking like mad shit about it. Like, yeah, we're killing commanders, and we also killed 69 civilians. So, he just starts talking in this language of like, we're just gonna kick everybody's ass. We're just gonna kick the shit out of you. Like, that is literally what he's doing.
There is another growing crisis for Benjamin Netanyahu and his government away from this accelerating military escalation in and around Gaza. Across Israel, from town to town, there is an eruption of communal violence between Jews and Arabs, despite Netanyahu's own pledge to bring it to an end with an iron fist. On Tuesday night, Jewish cars and a synagogue were torched. On Wednesday, it was a mosque that burned. Elsewhere, Arab businesses were ransacked. Jewish crowds chanted death to Arabs. Communities used to living close to each other, doing business with each other, riven by violence and hatred. Israel facing a social and security crisis on its streets as it wages an escalating conflict with Gaza's fighting factions. Harry Fawcett, Al Jazeera, Southern Israel.
Well, Rabi Khoury is the Director of Global Engagement at the American University of...
Here's the Michael Brooks clip that G. Wolf's talking about in chat, who talks about Israel-Palestine when people say it's a complex issue. This is what, I mean, this is the reality right here.
So it's not a complex issue. That's the big thing. It's super simple. There's one group that has enormous power. It's the most powerful country in the Middle East. It's backed by the United States. It acts on another population of people with total impunity and is never held accountable for anything. So there's no symmetry in the relationship, period. And just as like a thought experiment, IDW people, if we know that if somehow a population of Jewish refugees ended up in West Bank and Gaza, and an Arabic government in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv had an open-air prison in Jewish Gaza, which they bombed with white phosphorus, they killed civilians indiscriminately, and they had no provisions for medicine. They had an embargo that blocked food, that electricity wasn't running, that there was an over 48% unemployment rate, life expectancy and malnutrition statistics were horrifying. One of the major policymakers in this hypothetical Arabic Palestinian state said, we need to put those Jews on a diet. In the West Bank, there was another Jewish area where there was a little bit more autonomy, but there was regular Arabic settlements where they pulled up the Jewish farmers' foods, they terrorized them with rocks, the security forces broke children's bones, and they couldn't drive on their own roads. We'd all have no problem understanding what that was. So there's nothing complex about it. The second part of your question, it's a pure asymmetry relationship. And the question is rights or not. So that's it. It's not complicated.
Yeah, and that is 100% right. And yeah, Michael was really good on these kinds of foreign policy issues. It's not a simple. It's not a simple. I mean, it's not a complicated issue. You have again, and it has nothing to do with the fact that it's a well. Let's set that aside for a minute. It's got everything to do with the fact that yes, the power of Israel in the Middle East right now is unsurpassed. They're the only military power in the region. They're the largest, essentially, entity, the largest military by far. They can kick everybody else's ass at the same time, and they've done that. And they've decided to take that. And anytime that they do that, by the way, anytime that they do get taking over, start settling in the Palestinian territory, everybody just turns their head and says, "We don't give a shit. We don't care. That's fine." And any time that there is a response to that kind of settling, stealing the land of Palestinian civilians, they get paramilitary groups, attack. There is a response for that to and the what Israel does is they just stomp them. They just literally just kill dozens of people, and then they say, "Oh, look at that! We got high-ranking military officers. How about that? Aren't we doing a great job?" And we'll crush them some more. We literally don't give a shit how many civilians we kill, and then I don't want any. I don't want any. They said one kid died in a Israeli house that was hit with a rocket. That's very sad, and you don't want any Israeli people to be murdered either. But it's not the same. 69-1. It's just so off balance, and the way that it gets balanced, or the way that it gets balanced in the media, because that's the way that they talk about it, is that, oh, look, Palestine is doing, the Palestinians are, and they always focus in on Hamas, which is like authority in the area, which is also it's an elected authority in the area, which is also like classified as a terrorist group. Which I don't agree with Hamas on very much anything, and I think the rockets are a bad idea, for sure. However, like if they're essentially trying to implicate, when they do that, every single person that lives in Palestine, every single Palestinian, with the actions of Hamas. So essentially, they're saying that it's fine that we're killing 69 civilians because they elected this terrorist government, is what they say. Holy shit! Getting a link from Ginny here that we can move on to from Navarra. On Israel and Palestine.
Israel's occupation of the West Bank, the deadly airstrikes it rains on Gaza, and the expulsion of Palestinians from their homes are not just the wrongdoings of one side in an equal conflict. They are rather the ongoing practices of settler colonialism. This is not a dispute, it's an occupation. So why do Western media outlets report on the aggressions of the Israeli government as if they are responses to provocations on the part of the people they occupy? There's a simple answer.
It's always, look what you made me do. Look at you made us bomb, neighborhoods and kill 69 civilians. Look at what you made me do. That is like literal abuser language. Yeah. Israel has modern guided missiles. They can do airstrikes. They can like fly military planes over and just target whichever neighborhood they want and kill as many people as they want. And they do it.
It's the ideology of imperialism, but it's increasingly being called out. This was the Palestinian ambassador speaking to Newsnight's Emily Maitlis after 20 Palestinians, including 9 children, were killed in Israeli airstrikes on Monday in Gaza.
This is from earlier in the week.
Israelis think that Hamas are a radical terror group and that Palestinian officials use these holy times to incite violence. Was Hamas right to respond with rocket fire?
This isn't about Hamas. Hamas was not involved. There were tens of thousands.
They were when they fired rockets.
Hamas did not decide to evict people from their homes inside the occupied city of Jerusalem. East Jerusalem is occupied not according to my law only, but according to your law, according to the UK position, according to the United Nations. An occupation has to be temporary and it has to respect the rules that govern occupation. Israel has made mockery of these rules, particularly the issue of population transfers, ethnic cleansing, apartheid. I'm sure you have read the Human Rights Report. Those people have researched Israeli policies over the last 2 years. Ask the experts, not Netanyahu. Netanyahu is flaming.
How the fuck is she arguing with this guy when he's actually saying exactly what, let's go back. What is she taking exception with?
Hamas did not decide to evict people from their homes inside the occupied city of Jerusalem. East Jerusalem is occupied not according to my law only, but according to your law, according to the UK position, according to the United Nations. An occupation has to be temporary and it has to respect the rules that govern occupation. Israel has made mockery of these rules, particularly the issue of population transfers, ethnic cleansing, apartheid. I'm sure you have read the Human Rights Report. Those people have researched Israeli policies over the last 2 years. Ask the experts, not Netanyahu. Netanyahu is flaming
of the settlements, but let's just try and understand this, because Dori Gold, the former Israeli ambassador to the UN, has told us it was pre-planned by Hamas. The march had nothing to do with it. You wanted to make Israel look bad. Do you condemn the rocket attack?
You wanted to make Israel look bad. Well, if Israel was worried about looking bad, perhaps they shouldn't bust into Palestinian homes and evict the residents.
Attacks by Hamas.
I condemn and I condemn Israeli aggression. I mourn for the 20 people who were murdered in Gaza only tonight. 9 of them are children. I am so sad to see the hundreds of my people
but
being...
So I'm not asking about Israeli aggression. I will do that in a moment. I'm asking you about Hamas's aggression tonight.
I am not aware of any Israeli who has been killed. And you ask me a question.
Yeah, the Iron Dome can protect essentially the most of Israel from it's like crazy. It's actually really awesome technology from the perspective that they can just literally shoot these Hamas rockets out of the air 90% of the time. One or two might get through, but they literally are just basically protected by a wall of rockets. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Counting Amberjacks. Actually, watching Iron Dome is kind of crazy. Yeah, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's like literally shooting rockets out of the air. And which, I mean, obviously Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank don't have. These airstrikes hit every single fucking time.
Question about violence and condemnation. Who should be condemned, Emily? Who should be condemned? Did you see the images of the 9 children being dissipated in Gaza tonight? Who should be condemned? And then the UK Foreign Secretary is quick to condemn Hamas and never to condemn the Israeli atrocities on a daily basis. We are sick and tired of the double standards, and we have to call it right this time. Call a spade a spade.
Is it the Western governments? Is it? You heard the statement from Dominic Raab today. He condemned the firing of rockets. What is your response to the UK government?
Always the story begins when Palestinian reaction happens, as if it started with Hamas. Look at your question. Your question is about Hamas, rockets.
Yep.
But that's because I'm talking to you.
No, Emily. I have done many interviews. It starts with the Palestinian reaction, with the symptom of the illness. It never visits the illness. The illness is that this state, Israel, the occupying state, has been applying draconian measures against our people in every sense, depriving them the right to move, the right to own their property, the right to work, the right to vote in a free elections, including in East Jerusalem, every right you can imagine, and not only by the way inside the occupied territories, but even inside Israel itself. There is a Knesset law that has deprived our people inside Israel their basic rights of having self-determination. This whole system has been built. Endemic in it is the racism, endemic in it is the vulgar ultra-nationalism. That's why you get people trying to defend their dignity.
What he said there that really struck with me is this idea. He said, it's always the story begins with the Palestinian reaction, the symptom of the illness. So we say, why are you beginning this conversation with rockets from Gaza when that completely just ignores the context that's happening here, which is this is a place which has been under siege. These are people defending themselves. I want to get up a tweet from Omar Badar, which I think, just really summarized this really, really well. It made a lot of sense to me, made a lot of sense of what we're witnessing right now to me. So he says, 1, status quo. Occupation apartheid is violence against Palestinians. 2. Then Israel escalates through evictions, beatings, shootings. 3. Then some Palestinians respond with violence. Then 4. Then Israel responds with massacres. If you start reporting at number 3, you're misleading your audience.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that's actually perfect, because it's like rinse, lather, repeat. It starts all over again, and that is correct.
Clearly, that's where that interview was starting with. That interview was starting with, were Hamas justified in sending rockets? It's ignored the status quo, which is occupation and apartheid, and it's ignored the Israeli escalations which preceded those rockets being fired. But still, Western media always starts with the rockets. So that makes it seem like, oh, it's just these two sides, it's this cycle of violence. Ash, I want to get your thoughts on this, because, I mean, as Emily Maitlis said there, she sort of suggested, look, I'm going to now give some tough questions to the Israeli ambassador. I actually watched the show. She ends up, she does ask some tough questions, but none of them go into the issue of apartheid or occupation. They're all about, oh, maybe you're not responsible enough with your power. Maybe you're too trigger happy. None of them were really looking at the disease, which is occupation and which is apartheid. How do you think the media get away with it? Why do they do it? Why do they frame this as an equal battle between two sides?
In order to address this question, one of the things that you've got to do is look at the ideology which is underpinning this entire discussion. Now, you correctly called it imperialism, but another word that you could give it is essentially a liberal outlook on international relations. So you can acknowledge that something is a conflict. You can even sometimes acknowledge that something is an asymmetric conflict, where one side has got access to greater weaponry and technology than the other side. But what you cannot do, and what you cannot get your own head around, is the way in which even liberal states are complicit and active parts in ethnic cleansing and settler colonialism.
And again, why are the Powhatan attacking the colonists? And part of the other thing is too, they start to use these balancing phrases. I've seen on Twitter all morning the fact that they're talking about all-out war, as though like Palestine is an organized state with an organized military and has the capability to marshal resources to get an army to go to war. Like that entire framing implies way too much balance as well. But like when you start to use that language, the language of war, you're implying a certain amount of essentially, you're ascribing a certain amount of balance that's not there.
Because that is the narrative and the historical frame which makes all of this make sense, which makes that number one.
It makes sense, though, doesn't it, Counting Amberjack? The U.S. funds this shit because this U.S. Joe Biden actually said this himself in I think it was the 1990s, that if Israel did not exist, the United States would have to create it to essentially pursue its interest in the region. like the reason that the U.S. funds this is so that they have a huge foothold in both Israel and not militarily in Saudi Arabia, but they sort of use Saudi Arabia for other things but essentially it kind of keeps this real instability where you can essentially guide policy, and the point is to isolate Iran.
Day-to-day apartheid and dispossession. Number 2, escalation of aggression. Number 3, response of violence. Number 4, response of massacres. That is the frame which makes all of those things make sense. And liberal media, and when I'm saying liberal, I'm not talking here in terms of, social democratic or what do you think about wealth redistribution. I'm talking about, in some ways, that much looser ideological universe. Liberal media cannot make sense of this. It will not make sense of this, because then you have to ask the question of why. What was Britain's involvement in this? What was America's involvement in this? And how much do we put into...
If you have that clip, G, we'll drop it in Discord.
Maintaining a system of slow and then sometimes accelerated ethnic cleansing, where the day-to-day status quo of that system is apartheid. We do not have a media which is capable of addressing those questions. And as such, the humanity of Palestinians, and when I say humanity, I'm not just talking simply in terms of personhood, I'm talking humanity, the culture, the human rights, the right to self-defense, to resistance and self-determination. All of these things get pulled through what is essentially a war on terror frame. So it presumes that these people, most of whom are Muslim, are essentially terrorist or terrorist adjacent. It delegitimizes acts of lawful resistance and lawful self-defense against an occupying and out of control military force, and presents these things as terrorist and racialized threats, which have got a particular salience within an ecology of images within a British and an American context. And so that's why you see there is this uphill battle when there are Palestinians making media interventions. Now, the Palestinian ambassador in Newsnight made a very forthright and a very compelling and a very convincing one. What's important, I think, is for all of us with what little comparative platform we have, compared to Emily Maitlis or Newsnight, is to talk about that framing which makes sense of what's going on and not fall into this delusion that what we're seeing is an equal-sided conflict in which both sides are equally to blame, and if everyone just, sat down, have a cup of tea, it would all be solved. No.
That was one example of a Palestinian really impressively calling out a host who was, I suppose, giving this misleading framing of what's currently going on in Palestine. Another one is, or another clip that this one really went viral, was from Mohammed Al-Kurd.
Is it because he's on Reddit?
A journalist whose family are at threat of expulsion from their homes in Sheikh Jarrah. He is speaking to CNN.
Do you support the protests, the violent protests that have erupted in solidarity with you and other families in your...
What violent protests is she talking about? Hold on a second. She's asking this dude, do you support the violent protests in solidarity with you? What violent protests is she talking about?
He is speaking to CNN.
Do you support the protests, the violent protests that have erupted in solidarity with you and other families in your position right now?
Do you support the violent dispossession of me and my family?
Yeah, perfect response.
I'm just asking if you support the protests that are taking place in support of your family.
I support popular protests taking place against ethnic cleansing, yes.
Thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Mohammed Al-Kurd, thank you very much.
Yeah, supporting protests against genocide is actually good, and weird of CNN to try and frame that as a bad thing.
Thank you.
That was such a powerful answer. Do you condemn the odd act of violence, or I mean, systematic violence? Who knows? It's essentially saying, do you condemn resistance to apartheid? Is essentially what the question she's asking, and it is a ridiculous question, and it should be called out.
Would you protest Hitler even if the protests were violent?
As a ridiculous question. If what's going on is settler colonialism and apartheid, then for us to just constantly moralize about the tactics used by the oppressed, it's a distraction, essentially. This bias that you've just seen from these hosts is also reflected in policy. I mean, absolutely reflected in policy, in fact. This was UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab's response on Monday night after 20 Palestinians, including 9 children, had been killed by airstrikes in Gaza. Raab tweeted, "The UK condemns the firing of rockets at Jerusalem and locations within Israel. The ongoing violence in Jerusalem and Gaza must stop. We need an immediate de-escalation on all sides and end to targeting of civilians."
Just totally focusing in, like Omar Badr said, focusing on number 3, focusing in on the response, the Palestinian response to Israeli aggression. Interesting.
Population. So that is just so duplicitous. The UK condemns the firing of rockets at Jerusalem and locations.
It's not just media that kind of takes that position. It's like literal state policy in the UK, the US, most of the West. They start focusing in, the Palestinians are fighting back against being attacked or essentially settled, having their land settled, their people evicted. They're fighting back against that. That's actually the beginning of the story.
With Israel, that's the only thing he tweeted. There'd been 20 Palestinians killed. At that point in time, there'd been no Israeli killed. And he thinks that's a reasonable response. How more obvious could it be that you don't value Palestinian lives?
Dealing with the Dominic Raab tweet first, there was a statement from an IDF spokesperson, which I think came out today. And what it said was there is one address in Gaza. It is called Hamas. So if you want to talk about targeting of civilian populations, the entire nature of what's going on in Gaza, the fact that it is essentially an open-air prison where most of the water isn't even drinkable, where there's, incredible levels of deprivation and unemployment, and that is what it is like during peacetime. It is made that way. It is allowed to be that way because the West maintains and shares in this delusion that the entirety of Gaza must be considered a legitimate terrorist target. Now, that is not something which is legal under international law. There are rules in terms of armed conflict, in terms of distinction and proportionality, and even during so-called peacetime, even during times where there is not the active bombardment of residential buildings, these rules of disproportionality and distinction are not respected. That's why it exists as an open-air prison in the first place. So talking about the targeting of civilians, as if there is any equality between the firing of rockets, most of which are caught and destroyed by the Israeli Iron Dome system, and what goes on in Gaza on a day-to-day basis is at best delusional and at worst actively complicit in racism, imperialism, and ethnic cleansing. And as for the CNN clip, again, another wonderfully strong intervention, because it's a silly question. It's a fundamentally silly question, because what you never hear, and what you never hear put to spokespeople for the IDF or to the Israeli government is, well, what would you consider a proportionate response be to the ethnic cleansing of your people? Because then we can get away from this discourse.
Yeah. What if there's a genocide happening to you, what do you do about it? Yeah, Robert's here. When you play an Ash Sarkar clip, you know that he's coming.
And it is a nonsense discourse which treats.
Yeah, Jeremy Corbyn's still doing. God bless that dude. He's still doing the right thing. I really hate how they smeared him as an anti-Semite when he's like Boris Johnson literally benefits from the smearing of Jeremy Corbyn as an anti-Semite. That's so fucking incredible to me. I'm not blaming you for liking it, dude. It's fine. I'm just making fun.
All acts of violence the same. Of course, in an ideal world, we think that all acts of violence should be considered with equal moral weight and equal political meaning. But we do not live in that world, and we do not live in that world because there is an uneven distribution of violence in the world. So in the face of your oppression, your dispossession, your bombardment and your arrest and your obliteration as a culture, what do you think is a reasonable means by which to express dissent and to resist that ongoing process? Now, that is, of course, an open political question. Where people draw the line is different, but it is, in fact, a political question and not simply a moral one, which means that you can look at what's going on, not just in Gaza, but across the occupied territories, and issue a blanket condemnation, which is, in effect, a blank check for the ongoing abuse of power and ethnic cleansing perpetrated by the...
that's the other thing. There's no consequences ever. I mentioned this earlier, but if there's no, all of the blame goes on the Palestinians for shooting a couple of rockets in response to, and sometimes killing Israeli civilians, which is sad, and I don't think that that's good. But again, all the blame goes to Palestinians. All the blame goes to Hamas, and quote unquote Hamas, which is just a word that they use to just implicate every other every civilian in Palestine. Basically, the Palestinians also, they get most of their people get killed, and they also are the ones that get blamed, despite the fact that they're the ones that are feeling the most out of all sides, like out of this on all sides.
Israeli state and settlers.
I mean, we've just been talking about how it's ridiculous to see all violence as the same, because one side here is being occupied and one side is the occupier. In fact, though, most of the mainstream media and the big Western powers, they do the opposite. Basically, any violence by the occupier is legitimate, and any violence by the occupied isn't. So it's completely through the looking glass. And the best example of this was from this week. It was a response of Joe Biden's spokesperson on the Middle East to the airstrikes and the rockets.
This dude right here. Oh
We're
my
speaking
God.
of the principle of self-defense.
I'm asking if you think that the principle of self-defense applies to the retaliatory the airstrikes that they're conducting in response.
Matt, this is a very fluid situation. I would hesitate to comment on operations beyond, the rocket fire that is clearly targeting innocent civilians in Israel. So I would hesitate to speak to specific operations.
This is so disgusting. Like he basically is going out there. This motherfucker is going out there. He's condemning the Palestinians, like literally saying, like, we condemn like you shooting your rockets. The fact that we killed 14 kids actually doesn't matter. The fact that that Israel killed 14 kids doesn't matter. It's literally disgusting. Like it's so unbelievable.
No, I'm asking if you think that the principle of self-defense applies to the retaliatory
as we talk about
the airstrikes that they're conducting in response.
Matt, this is a very fluid situation. I would
hesitate now it's a fluid situation. Now it's complicated.
On operations beyond the rocket fire that is clearly targeting innocent civilians in Israel. So I would hesitate to speak to specific operations that have just occurred, but the broader principle of self-defense is something we stand by on behalf of Israel and every other country.
Do you think that an Israeli military response to the rockets coming in, a military response to the rockets coming in is covered by this broader rubric of self-defense, right?
Self-defense often does authorize the use of force.
What level of force?
I want to ask you about East Jerusalem, but let's talk about what you said about the principle of self-defense. Does that in any way apply to the Palestinians? Do they have a right to self-defense? Do Palestinians have a right to self-defense?
Broadly speaking, Saeed, we believe in the concept of self-defense. We believe it applies to any state. I don't think that I certainly wouldn't want my words to be construed as.
I understand.
Holy shit, dude! Yeah, this is kind of crazy. Yeah, they're basically saying this is why we're trying to kill you, because we're striking terror, quote unquote. But like, oh, sorry, we were shooting your neighborhood up. You just happen to be right where we think hidden weapons are at. Yeah, our only goal is to strike terror. Holy crap. Yeah, Cody's right. Do you think the citizens of Gaza are going to see this tweet? Not likely. Yeah, what the fuck?
I want to ask you, I don't want to harp on this either, but, the Israelis killed 13 people just now, including maybe 5 or 6 children. Do you condemn that? Do you condemn the killing of children?
Saeed,
I'm asking, do you condemn the killing of Palestinian children?
They constantly try and frame Palestine as a state when it's like literally just an occupied territory. And like I was saying, I said this earlier, there was talk about, I saw this on Twitter like all morning, like a lot of headlines are saying total war between Israel and Palestine. It's like, how the fuck can Palestine like actually muster an army when it's not a full-fledged state right now? I mean, that's ridiculous.
Obviously, and these reports are just emerging, and I understand, I was just speaking to the team, I understand we don't have independent confirmation of facts on the ground yet, so I'm very hesitant to get into reports that are just emerging. Obviously, the deaths of civilians, be they Israeli or Palestinians, are something we would take very seriously.
Okay.
And here's the reason that this guy is like this. So here is Joe Biden, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, talking about, and we can continue that video in just a minute, but here's Joe Biden talking about Middle East policy. This is in the 1996, I want to say.
We look at the Middle East. I think it's about time we stop, those of us who support, as most of us do, Israel in this body, for apologizing for our support for Israel. There's no apology to be made. None. It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel.
That's so wild to me. The fact that it's so telling about Joe Biden's framing of like the way he views the world. And Jeremy Scahill actually talked about this on a really fantastic interview on the Majority Report yesterday. He talked about basically they talked for almost an hour about Joe Biden and the way that he's fit in to U.S. foreign policy and essentially how he basically has been like almost primarily interested in pursuing U.S. interests abroad and nothing else. That's the only thing that matters.
You're going to know as soon as I read what.
Maybe we'll watch that on Friday.
That there's a big problem.
Young Joe Biden, like his hairline, by the way, holy shit, man! Like, where does hair come back from?
Not a problem. It just doesn't answer the question. We believe that it, meaning the right to self-defense, applies to any state. Well, you see the problem, right? Yes?
Do you want to?
Do you regard Palestine as a state?
I wasn't
do
referring.
Do you think that? Do you?
But
you don't in the context of the ICC and the UN. So are you saying?
Dude, this dude is so owned.
If it applies to any state, are you saying that Palestinians don't have a right?
This dude is so fucking owned.
I was making a broader point, not attached to Israel or Palestinians in that case.
So they do have a right to self-defense.
Matt, I'm not in a position to debate the legalities from up here.
But he was in the position to sort of state, like he was in a position to state where his like loyalties lied at the beginning. He was in a position to condemn Palestinian civilians, or Palestinian militants even. Despite, outside of the context of this is a response to, again, the invasion of neighborhoods.
The message is one of de-escalation.
That was just disgusting to watch, actually, essentially. He's saying when Israel bombs Gaza, when Israel bombs Palestinians, that's self-defense. States have a right to self-defense. If they feel like they're at risk from rockets which are being fired, then they have a right to respond essentially however they want. If they bomb tower blocks, so be it. That's the right to self-defense. He's saying, but the Palestinians, you see, they don't have a state, so they don't have the right to self-defense. All they have is terrorism. And so you can see this way whereby he has basically automatically legitimized the violence of the oppressor and automatically delegitimized the violence of the impressed. That's why I say it's through the looking glass. It is the precise opposite of what any moral compass should tell you in this situation. As Ash said, you can have
the only way that because we watched the Michael Brooks clip earlier. The only way that the Palestine and Israel situation is complicated is if you make it complicated intentionally. Like, it's not complicated. Like, we've sort of described exactly what's going on multiple times, but the way that it gets sort of framed, we just saw it perfectly by that Ned Price guy, is to just make it seem as confusing as possible, to make it seem like, oh, actually the aggressors are the people that are like getting their neighborhoods, their neighborhoods wiped out, and their kids murdered, and the people that are on the people that are the good guys are the ones that are like stomping out 69 civilians and bombing neighborhoods and doing all the bad stuff. That's the easy way the state has a right to self-defense when you disregard people being slaughtered as stateless. Yeah. And not even stateless, like literally you regard them as like any action that they do is terrorism.
Debates about how oppression should be resisted, right? So there will be people that say even if a people are colonized and oppressed, I'm not comfortable with them using violence. It's a fine position. But to say the oppressor can use violence, the oppressed cannot, and to almost have these sort of rules, which means that's by definition the case. Yeah. it's just phenomenally disgusting, really. Ash, I want to bring you in on this because, this isn't the Trump administration. This is the Biden administration. And we know that, on certain issues, when it comes to, fiscal policy, for example, they have been fairly progressive. And Biden is seen to be a president who does, listen to the left. But when it comes to foreign policy and policy on things like Palestine, I mean, it's hard to imagine a response that's more reactionary than that, really, isn't it?
I mean, look, when it comes to America thinking that the security interests of Israel are in line with American geopolitical interests, this is, of course, something which extends for a much longer durée than the appearance of Trump. And it is truly, I think, an issue of bipartisan agreement. This is sometimes quite crudely, I think, understood as the power of the Israel lobby, but it's actually something which I think, you can understand through the power of America in the region of the Middle East and seeing Israel as a vehicle for the advancement of American and more generally Western interests in the region. And so that's why I think you do not have a serious tilt leftwards from Joe Biden or his spokesperson, although you may see perhaps much less flagrant support for the expansion and the activities of Netanyahu, and you might have a bit more considered or muted condemnation than you certainly would have had under Trump. But when it comes to the fundamentals about the recognition of a Palestinian state, the recognition of a Palestinian state and people's right to self-determination, to resistance, to self-defense, you are not going to see something which is all that different from what a Republican president or indeed what President Trump would say.
I mean, in terms of people who pose as being progressive but are actually very reactionary when it comes to issues like this, I've just got one more example for you. This is Wes Streeting, just been promoted to the shadow cabinet, it's worth noting. He tweeted last night, "There can be no justification for the Hamas rockets raining down on Israel tonight. Friends of mine are cowering in shelters."
I mean,
with
these
their
are all
children.
a bunch of Andrew Yangs, aren't they? Like, they're doing the exact same shit Andrew Yang did.
And he goes on, "Don't even bother with what about tweets. I wrote to the Foreign Secretary today about the loss of life in Gaza and related issues. I deplore those rocket attacks too. Some might treat this conflict like cheering on a football team. I don't. Try being consistent yourselves." Now, I mean, the first tweet there is what Ash was saying. He's flattening violence. To just completely decontextualize it, violence when you are resisting occupation and apartheid is the same as violence when you are trying to enforce occupation and apartheid, according to Wes Streeting in that tweet. And secondly, that second one, to say, if you see a difference between fighting apartheid and enforcing apartheid, that's essentially the same as supporting a football team. He is willing to belittle this issue to such an extent that he thinks that anyone who seriously cares about apartheid and colonialism and occupation is just doing this because it's like a game to them. And I mean, I'm sorry, Wes Streeting, but this isn't a game, right? And it's not a game to the people who care about it. The people who care about it because they have a moral conscience, and they hate to see overwhelming force used to oppress a people for over 50 years while they kill children in airstrikes. And if you can't empathize with that, if you can't relate to that, if you think that must be cynical, then the problem is with your moral compass, not with anyone else's.
All right. Yeah. And here's one more video, and then we can sort of like wind this up. I expected to get some more stuff today, but we really kind of got in on this Palestine issue, which is, I think it's actually a good thing because we, it's a really important issue. It's difficult to kind of talk about a lot of times, and it's been really good to talk about it with you guys. But here's Rashida Tlaib talking about Nakba.
As we talk about our history, know that many of my neighbors in Detroit and beyond may not know what we mean by Nakba, but they do understand to be killed, expelled from your home and land, and stripped of your human rights.
Forced from their homes, 15,000 killed by Israeli.
My ancestors and current family in Palestine deserve their history to be told without any obstruction or lies. They have a right to be able to explain to the world that they are still suffering from Nakba, when the world watched with no intervention. The land confiscations, home demolitions, expulsions are just part of the painful journey of the Palestinian people. The dehumanization and feeling less than on your own homeland is traumatic and can be seen in Palestinian children being raised under this unimaginable condition. As a Palestinian American in Congress, I have been told by some colleagues who disagree with my fact-based truth about segregation, racism, and violence in Israel towards Palestinians. They continue to tell me, quote, directly, I need to know the history, they would say to me. What they mean, unintentionally or not, is that the history of the creation of Israel being told to one generation to another erases the truth about the Nakba.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, we can get more into that some other time, into the history of that. We could maybe find, if anybody knows anybody that would be, willing to come on and talk with me about the Nakba specifically, or anything regarding this issue, hook us up. I know. Well, I could reach out to a couple of folks. I don't want to name any names. But I would love to have a conversation about this and sort of how the broader implications. Anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and end the stream. And just as a reminder, you can support Good Morning Comrade, goodmorningcomrade.com, patreon.com/goodmorningcomrade. You can subscribe. You can become a patron there. We're trying to get to our first 10 patrons. We really want to get to the point where we can start doing some. We get some money in. Get some extra stuff. Get Rashida on. I would love to get Rashida on. I actually have a picture with her from about a year or so ago, maybe a year and a half ago. There was Mark Allen-Derry from WHIV had set up a little Q&A with her, with our friend Jenny Yanez, a couple other folks, and yeah, let me see if I can find that picture. But it was probably about 2 years ago. God damn, time goes by quickly. I'll tell you what. But anyway, yeah, Good Morning Comrade, patreon.com/Good Morning Comrade. Please support the show. We have costs for our hosting. We have costs for our StreamYard, which we use to run the show. We have a Zoom account that we use to communicate right now because we're still not meeting face to face and various other things. So we're trying to make sure that we're no longer. I didn't say we were losing money, but we would like to make more money. The podcast is self-sustainable, but we would like to get more. We would like to get more. We don't make any actual money, and there are me and Robert put a considerable amount of time into this show. So please do support us if and when you can. Follow us on Twitch, twitch.tv/Good Morning Comrade Radio. You're probably already watching us on YouTube. Facebook.com/Good Morning Comrade. What else? What am I missing? And I don't. Saturday, Robert, are you free? Maybe we can do a stream together and we can talk about. Oh, you know what? I did want to plug one super last thing, and it's not for us. It's for our friends at the Valley Labor Report. Let me pull that up real quick. This is like super important. I've talked about this a little bit, but I want to keep kind of hammering on it. On the 22nd, so next Saturday, there's going to be a fundraiser for the striking workers that we talked about at the Warrior Met coal mine out in Central Alabama. Our friends at the Valley Labor Report are going to be kind of hosting a 2-day fundraiser to make sure that the workers out there are going to get they're not going to be getting paychecks for the time being. So making sure that they get some support in the time being. You can watch it at the Valley Labor Report page. I think we're actually gonna have David Story on tomorrow from the Valley Labor Report. He's one of the hosts. We've already had Jacob on to talk about this a little bit, and I kind of wanted to touch base with David as well. But yeah, that's going to be on next Saturday. So yeah, that's going to be it for us. Yeah, Robert's on Twitch mostly. I'm on Facebook and all the other stuff. He hasn't broadcast in a while, but he will once Elite Dangerous DLC comes out next week. There's a I do the Twitch stream. I do them all at the same time. You gonna drop the link on Twitter? I will drop the link on Twitter, and I'll drop it in Discord as well. All right, y'all. Have a good day. Love you. Bye-bye.